This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. We're going to talk about John Brennan right now, President Obama's nominee to become the next chief of the CIA. The news agency Reuters is reporting that Brennan had detailed information on the agency's torture program while serving there under President George W. Bush. Official records apparently show Brennan received regular internal CIA updates about the progress of torture techniques, including waterboarding. It's unclear if Brennan raised any objections at the time he was made aware. Brennan's confirmation hearing will be February 7th. In 2006, he gave an interview with Frontline on PBS, where he said it was right for the Bush administration to, quote, take off the gloves after the 9/11 attacks.
The war or the campaign against terrorism is going to be a long one, and that the opposition, whether it be Al-Qaeda or whether it be Iraq, doesn't play by the Marquis de Queensberry rules, and therefore, you know, the U.S. in some areas has to take off the gloves, and I think that's entirely appropriate. I think we do have to take off the gloves in some areas, but within bounds, and at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reason, and with full understanding of what the consequences of that might be.
That was John Brennan in 2006. When President Obama was first elected in his first term, he wanted John Brennan to be his director of Central Intelligence. There was such an outcry in the human rights community that John Brennan pulled his name out. Now, 4 years later, President Obama has officially nominated John Brennan once again to head the CIA. Our guest, John Kiriakou, is about to go to jail, was sentenced to 30 months in prison, worked for the CIA there while John Brennan was there. Can you respond to what John Brennan knew when he knew it and the fact that President Obama wants him to be head of the CIA?
Sure. Obviously, I can't read John Brennan's mind, but I can tell you that at the time that the torture techniques were being implemented, John Brennan was President Bush's director of the National Counterterrorist Center. He was also, a little earlier than that, the deputy executive director, and then I believe executive director of the CIA. That's the number 3 ranking position in the CIA. So he would have had to have been intimately involved in not necessarily in carrying out the torture techniques, but in the policy, the torture policy. Either that or he had to be brain dead, because you can't be in positions like that, director of the National Counterterrorist Center and executive director of the CIA, without knowing what the CIA's torture policies are. Now, I'm surprised, frankly, also at the fact that there's no outrage in the human rights community now that Mr. Brennan's nomination has been made official. There was a great hue and cry in 2009 when he was initially floated for the position of CIA director, and I'm not sure why there's a difference between 4 years ago and now. John Brennan certainly hasn't changed.
John Kiriakou, I want to read a comment made by the judge at your sentencing hearing. Judge Leonie Brinkema sentenced you to 30 months in prison last Friday, saying, quote, "This case is not a case about a whistleblower. It's a case about a man who betrayed a very solemn trust, and that is a trust to keep the integrity of his agency intact and specifically to protect the identity of co-workers. I think 30 months is frankly way too light because the message has to be sent to every covert agent that when you leave the agency, you can't just start all of a sudden revealing the names of the people with whom you worked," the judge said. John Kiriakou, can you comment on that statement?
Sure. When Judge Brinkema accepted the plea deal in October, she called 30 months fair and appropriate. I can only think that with a courtroom packed full of journalists on last Friday, she decided to seize the moment and make a statement that would be carried in the papers. I don't know what changed between October and January, other than the fact that she and the prosecution had several ex parte communications. What that means is the prosecutors were able to meet with the judge related to my case without the defense, my attorneys, being present. So we have no idea what it was that the prosecution told the judge. We were not allowed to defend ourselves. Indeed, Judge Brinkema denied 75 motions that we made asking for declassification of information so that I could present a defense. In August of 2012, after our motions had been denied, my attorneys and I walked out of the courtroom, and my attorney said, "We have no defense. She won't let us say anything. She won't let us defend you." And so we were forced into plea negotiations. But again, I'm not sure why the judge changed her position between October and January. It was inexplicable.
Explain what that's like in the courtroom when they invoke national security, that the prosecutor can come forward and speak privately with the judge without your defense attorneys being there.
Yeah, I had never heard of such a thing before. But in August, when we made our 75 motions, we thought that the judge would block off 2 days to hear the 75. In fact, there had been a conversation with the prosecution, and so she blocked off an hour to hear the 75 motions. So we knew we were in trouble. And then at the very start of the hearing, the prosecutor got up and said that he was requesting a Rule 4 conversation. I didn't know what this was. My attorneys objected and said, if you don't want the defendant to hear, at least allow us to hear so that we can represent his interests. And the judge said, no, this is a national security case. I'm allowed an ex parte communication with the prosecutors. So the prosecutors went up to the bench. We could hear them whispering. They came back to their table, and the judge said, all 75 motions are denied. And that was the end of it. We got up and we walked out of court, and my attorney said, we have to negotiate a plea. It was extremely disheartening.
Jesslyn Radak, I wanted to ask you about the legal implications of this case and how it fits into the treatment of government whistleblowers under the Obama administration.
Absolutely. To get to the point you just raised with John, I think the reason Judge Brinkema changed her opinion between October and last week is because the government submitted a secret statement that John was not allowed to see that played a large role in the sentencing hearing, but neither the public nor the defendant were allowed to see the statement, which is very Kafkaesque. But in the grander scheme, the prosecution of John Kiriakou and the war on whistleblowers using the heavy-handed Espionage Act by charging people who dare to tell the truth as being enemies of the state sends a very chilling message. And Judge Brinkema herself acknowledged that a strong message had to be sent that secrets must be kept. But apparently that only applies to people who are trying to reveal government abuses and illegality, because all of the people in the White House and the CIA who revealed classified information and undercover identities to the makers of a Hollywood film, Zero Dark 30, have done so with impunity and with lavish praise.
Wait,
so
can you say specifically what you're talking about, Jesslyn Radak?
Yes, specifically, the White House and the CIA were very involved in the making of Zero Dark 30, which pretends to be some kind of neutral film that implies torture led to the capture of Osama bin Laden, which it absolutely did not. In that process, a high-level Defense Department official, Michael Vickers, revealed the identity of an undercover Special Operations Command officer, but was not held to account for that. And the CIA revealed numerous classified pieces of information, including sources and methods. So
Keep going.
So when the United States talks about the sanctity of keeping secrets, and both the judge and multiple statements by United States officials discussed that, they are the biggest leakers of all, and they do so with impunity. I
wanted to talk about another whistleblower targeted by the Obama administration, who's been former National Security Agency analyst. He's Thomas Drake. He worked for the NSA for nearly 7 years before blowing the whistle. Thomas Drake appeared on Democracy Now! Last March.
The critical thing that I discovered was not just the massive fraud, waste, and abuse, but also the fact the NSA had chosen to ignore a 23-year legal regime, which had been established in 1978 called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and which at NSA during the time that I was not only NSA but also in the military, flying on RC-135s overseas during the latter part of the Cold War. It was a contrary. The one thing you did not do, it was the prime directive of NSA. It was, you know, the First Amendment at NSA, which is you do not spy on Americans.
And what'd you find?
Without a warrant. I found, much to my horror, that they had tossed out that legal regime. That it was the excuse of 9/11, which I was told was exigent conditions now prevailed. We essentially can do anything. We opened up Pandora's box. We're going to turn the United States of America into the equivalent of a foreign nation for the purpose of dragnet, blanket electronic surveillance.
That's former National Security Agency analyst Thomas Drake. Jocelyn Radecki is one of your clients. What happened to him?
Yes, I represented both Tom Drake and John Kiriakou. The government dropped all 10 felony counts against Tom Drake, and he pled guilty to a minor misdemeanor, the equivalent of a parking ticket. I find it appalling that the two men who revealed the biggest scandals of the Bush administration, namely warrantless wiretapping and torture, are the only two who've been criminally prosecuted for it, and not the people who secretly surveilled the communications of Americans, and not the people who were involved in the torture program, all of whom have been conferred immunity by either the president or by acts of Congress.
John Kiriakou, you're now, the president is President Obama. Did you see a change between President Obama and his predecessor, President Bush? And also, when you were talking about John Brennan, do you think he should head the CIA? What message do you think that sends, and what has changed in the last 4 years when he withdrew his name for consideration?
In 2010, when my book came out, I was giving a speech in Los Angeles, and a woman asked me a question about the difference between President Obama and President Bush. And I'll never forget the question because it was just so crazy. She said, can you explain the CIA's position on the jihadization of American foreign policy under President Obama? And I laughed and I said, ma'am, with all due respect, President Obama's foreign policy is an extension of President Bush's foreign policy. If there's any difference at all, President Obama is killing more people overseas than President Bush ever did. So no, I don't think there's any difference at all between the Bush foreign policy and the Obama foreign policy, which I think really is a shame for us, because there was a wonderful opportunity to take a different path and to reclaim our position as a moral leader in the world. So I'm disappointed in that. With regard to John Brennan, I've known John Brennan since 1990. I worked directly for John Brennan twice. I think that he's a terrible choice to lead the CIA. I think that it's time for the CIA to move beyond the ugliness of the post-September 11th regime. And we need someone who is going to respect the Constitution and to not be bogged down by a legacy of torture. I think that President Obama's appointment of John Brennan sends the wrong message to all Americans.
You worked with him, directly for him. Did Brennan receive regular internal CIA updates about the progress of torture techniques, including waterboarding, as Reuters is reporting?
I worked for him when he was an analytic manager. It was before he really hit the big time under George Tenet. But again, I think that it's impossible for him to not have gotten these briefings, for him to not have been intimately involved in the policy by virtue of his senior positions, some of the senior-most positions in the CIA. It's just impossible that he didn't know what was going on.
John Kiriakou, you'll shortly be going to prison. Do you know exactly when your prison sentence will begin? And how are you preparing for this? You're the father of 5 children.
I'm the father of 5. I don't know exactly when this will be. It'll be sometime in the next 4 to 6 weeks. I'll have to report to a prison somewhere. I don't know where. It's frankly very hard to prepare. You have to do things like arrange a power of attorney, arrange child care, I mean, there are so many things to do. It's just overwhelming. My wife, thank God, is very strong and very tough and very supportive, and we're treating this like temporary duty overseas. It was not unusual for me to go overseas for many months at a time, sometimes as long as 2 years at a time, 2.5 years. So we're treating this like an overseas deployment. I can call my children virtually every day. If I'm close enough, they can come and visit me, and I'm just hoping for the best.
How old are your kids, John?
I have two sons from a first marriage who are 19 and 16, and then my wife and I have 3 children, an 8-year-old boy, a 6-year-old girl, and a 1-year-old boy.
And what do they understand?
Well, they know that I've been involved in a fight with the FBI for the last year, and I told them, you know, I've been fighting the FBI, and unfortunately I lost. And so because I lost, my punishment is I'm going to have to go away for a couple of years, and I'm going to try to teach bad guys how to get their high school diplomas. And when I'm all done with that, I'll come home and we'll live as a family and everything's going to be okay again.
John Kiriakou, quickly before we conclude, what advice would you give to whistleblowers now, given what's happened in your case?
I made mistakes in my case. I would say first go through the chain of command, which I didn't do. I should have done. I would say if you get no satisfaction through your chain of command, go to the congressional oversight committees. But do not remain silent. If you see waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality, shout it from the rooftops.
John, we're going to have to leave it there.
Congress.
Thank you so much for being with us. John Kiriakou spent 14 years at the CIA as an analyst and case officer. He's going to jail for 2.5 years. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.